They thought I was gone. 10 years of silence, of being left out of every photo, every memory, every chapter. But the truth doesn't stay buried forever. I wasn't invited back into their lives with kindness, just a funeral notice, and signed. They never expected me to show up. They certainly didn't expect the will. And no one, absolutely no one, expected my father's final words to be for me. This is not a story of revenge. It's a story of survival. Of quiet strength. Of what happens when the one they erased becomes the one they can't ignore. If you've ever felt forgotten, if you've ever been pushed aside, silenced, or told you didn't belong, this story is for you. Because you're not invisible. And your voice deserves to be heard. Welcome to ErasedMe, where the untold stories finally come to light. Subscribe to the channel, share with someone who needs to feel seen, and leave a comment below, because healing begins when we speak. Now, let me tell you how it all started. The envelope was plain. No return address, no embellishment. Just my name, Rachel Elaine Moore, written in a firm, familiar hand that I hadn't seen in over a decade. It sat wedged between junk mail and a grocery flyer, almost lost in the chaos of an ordinary Tuesday morning. I nearly tossed it into the recycling bin without a second thought. But something, intuition, maybe, made my fingers pause. I opened it carefully. The paper inside was thick, formal. A funeral invitation. My father was dead. I stood in the kitchen, letter in hand, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. I waited for the wave of grief, anger, even relief, but nothing came. Just that familiar hollowness that had followed me from Charleston all those years ago. It had been 10 years since I'd heard anything from the Moore family. 10 years since I packed my son, a battered suitcase, and the last of my dignity into a rusty car and left everything behind. Caleb had been just a baby back then. I still remember strapping him into the back seat, whispering promises through a split lip that still throbbed from the night before. I drove through the darkness, not knowing where we were going, just that we couldn't stay. I had gone to my father that night, desperate, broken. He opened the door, looked at the bruises on my face, the fear in my eyes, and simply said, "You made your bed." Then he shut the door on us both. But I didn't collapse. I rebuilt. In Savannah, I shelved books in a dusty library, read bedtime stories to Caleb, learned how to live small but safe. I never heard from my father again. He never called, never wrote. But I sent money every month, through Mr. Gerald, his neighbor, making sure he had food, heat, medicine. I did it quietly, without expectation. Even Caleb didn't know. Now, this. I must have gone pale because Caleb came into the kitchen, his sketchbook under one arm. "You okay, Mom?" I couldn't answer. My throat tightened. He glanced at the letter, then back at me. "Are you going to go?" I stared down at the invitation again, at the name of a man who'd once been everything, and then nothing. I didn't know what I'd find there. Closure? Anger? Or more silence? But I knew one thing. If there was anything left unsaid, I needed to hear it. Charleston greeted us with gray skies and a chill that crept beneath my coat. The chapel stood at the end of a tree-lined lane, smaller than I remembered, but somehow heavier, like the years had settled on it too. Stained glass windows flickered dimly in the morning light. Caleb gripped my hand tighter as we stepped inside. The moment the doors creaked shut behind us, heads began to turn. Whispers trailed behind us like smoke. "That's her," someone hissed softly. "She came?" I thought she was living out west. My name wasn't said aloud, but I felt it in every sideways glance. The air inside was thick, not with grief, but with something stale and bitter. I kept my eyes forward, spine stiff. Caleb stayed close, his small frame nearly hidden beneath his too-big jacket. He wore it like armor. I spotted Lindsay near the front, dressed in sleek black, her hair twisted into an immaculate knot. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, grief applied carefully, lips just slightly parted in delicate mourning. Mark stood beside her, hands clasped, expression sculpted in indifference. Lindsay's eyes met mine, a flicker of disbelief crossing her face before she smirked. Well, well, she murmured, just loud enough for those near her to hear. The prodigal returns. Must think there's money left after all. Mark chuckled, low and humorless. I didn't respond. I'd learned long ago that silence could cut deeper than any retort. We walked to the last pew, the very back. I didn't come here to be seen. I came to say goodbye. Caleb slid in beside me, his little hand trembling in mine. I leaned down and whispered, "It's okay, baby. We'll just sit quietly, then we'll go." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't okay, not really. My presence here was unwelcome. I was an intruder at my own father's funeral. The preacher began speaking, his voice echoing under the old wooden rafters. Prayers were said. A few family members stood and spoke, edited memories, curated grief. My name was never mentioned. Not once. They spoke of childhood summers, of Lindsay's tireless care, of Mark's occasional flights home to help manage the house. The story they told was clean, neat, one where I never existed. I stared ahead, jaw tight. Caleb rested his head on my shoulder. I could feel him listening too, taking it all in. He was old enough now to understand omission, to sense the weight of silence. No one looked at me. No one acknowledged me. Not even the cousins who used to braid my hair or beg me for piggyback rides. It was like I had been edited out of their memory, erased from every page. When the service ended, people filed past without a glance. One elderly aunt gave me a polite nod, then turned away before I could smile back. Lindsay brushed past me like I was furniture. Mark paused only long enough to mutter, "Didn't think you had the guts to show up." I met his eyes. "Neither did I said. He smirked. "Don't get comfortable. It's not your story anymore." He was wrong. I wasn't here to be in their story. I was here to end mine. The Moore family home hadn't changed. Same red brick, same white columns, same ivy curling around the porch like fingers refusing to let go. But stepping through the door after 10 years felt like walking into a museum curated by people who had long since erased me. Guests were already gathered, faces I recognized but hadn't seen in over a decade. They didn't speak to me, but their eyes said plenty. Conversations shifted into whispers the moment I entered. Every glance was a needle, and I felt every single one. Lindsay stood by the fireplace with a wine glass in hand, swirling it as though she were hosting a cocktail party instead of mourning her father. Mark leaned beside her, wine in one hand, phone in the other, barely concealing his boredom. When they saw me, Mark raised an eyebrow. "Well," he said to no one in particular, "this should be quick. She got cut out years ago." A few people chuckled. Some looked away, pretending to be deeply interested in the antique books on the shelf. I said nothing. My coat stayed on. Caleb stayed beside me, small fingers wrapped tight around mine like he was trying to anchor us both. We found a seat near the back of the parlor, tucked behind a floral arrangement that smelled stronger than it looked. I glanced around at the framed photographs that lined the walls. Lindsay's graduation, Mark on a boat, beach trips to Hilton Head. Not one of me. Not even from childhood. I was a ghost, neatly deleted. Lindsay noticed me looking. Her smile curved sharp. "You can sit, Rachel," she said sweetly. "But don't expect a chapter." I didn't reply. I had no intention of fighting ghosts in their own house. Then the front door creaked open again, and the room fell quiet. Thomas Dawson stepped in like a man immune to awkwardness. His suit was gray, pressed with military precision. His briefcase was leather, old but polished. And tucked beneath his arm was a small cedar box, gleaming under the chandelier. Caleb sat straighter. I felt him breathe differently, like he already knew this moment would change something. "Thank you all for being here," Mr. Dawson said, his voice calm, controlled. "As per Mr. Moore's instructions, we will begin with a video message before moving on to the formal reading of the will." "A video?" Lindsay scoffed, barely lifting her gaze from her wine. "Can't we just read the will? We all know what it says." Mark chimed in. "Let's not drag this out. Some of us have places to be." But Mr. Dawson didn't flinch. He walked past them, set the cedar box gently on the coffee table in front of the hearth, then placed his briefcase beside it. With practiced hands, he undid the latches. "It was your father's express wish," he said evenly, "that this be viewed before any legal matters are addressed." Someone near the door whispered, "He recorded something?" Lindsay rolled her eyes. Mark muttered a curse under his breath. Still, no one left. Caleb loosened his grip on my hand. I looked down at him, and he looked up at me with eyes full of something I hadn't seen in a long time: hope. Not excitement. Not fear. Hope. The kind that waits in silence, that survives years of being unseen. And suddenly, I wasn't afraid anymore. The screen flickered. Then again. And then. There he was. The screen flickered once, then settled. A faint hum filled the room, replacing every whisper, every breath. And then. There he was. My father. Older than I remembered. His face was thinner, his jaw softer. The hard lines that used to cut across his expression had collapsed into something worn. Behind him stood his oak desk, untouched, unchanged. The painting of the marshland still hung crooked on the wall, like it always had, no one daring to fix it. He looked directly at the camera. No notes. No cue cards. Just him. And us. "If Rachel is watching this," he began, voice low and graveled, "I owe you the apology I never gave." The room went completely still. Lindsay lowered her glass. Mark shifted in his seat, confused. But I froze. "I was wrong," he continued. "I judged you for leaving a marriage I didn't understand. I called it weakness when it was courage. I thought you were running away when really, you were protecting your son." He paused, swallowing hard. His fingers trembled in his lap. "When you showed up on my porch, bruised, shaking, with Caleb in your arms, I should have opened the door. I should have pulled you inside and said, 'You're safe now.'" My throat clenched. I could feel the tears forming before I could stop them. "But I didn't," he said quietly. "I let my pride speak louder than my love. I believed what I wanted to believe. It was easier than facing my own failure, as a man, and as a father." Caleb, silent beside me, reached for my hand again. His small fingers folded into mine. This time, I didn't squeeze, I simply held him. "I thought I was teaching you responsibility," my father said. "But what I was doing was punishing you, for being stronger than I ever taught you to be." Someone exhaled too loudly in the room behind me. A cousin, maybe. I didn't look. I couldn't. He leaned forward in the video, voice gentler now. "A few years ago, Gerald came by. He had an envelope. Said it was from someone who wanted to help with the heating bill. The handwriting. I knew it was you." He smiled, faintly. "You sent money every month. No calls. No credit. Just care. Even when I gave you nothing back. Even when I pretended you didn't exist, you never stopped being my daughter. Not even when I stopped being your father." I covered my mouth with my hand. The tears came hot and fast, no longer willing to stay hidden. "I heard things, Rachel. From Gerald. About your job at the library. About Caleb. He said your boy's bright. Said he looks at the world the way you do, with quiet, steady kindness. He said you made a life. Not a grand one, maybe, but a good one. He smiled again, then winced as if the effort hurt. I don't deserve your forgiveness, he said. But I couldn't leave this world without saying the truth. You were right. You walked away from pain and built something better. You did what I didn't. There was a long pause. His eyes shimmered. I don't want to be remembered as the man who turned his back on his daughter. So I've changed the will. Gasps broke out across the room. They don't know yet, he said. But they will. The camera zoomed slightly as he leaned back. I'm proud of you, Rachel. I always should have been. But I am now. Of the woman you became when I wasn't looking. He drew a shaky breath. Tell Caleb thank you, he whispered. For giving me one last chance to be a father, even from a distance. Then the screen went dark. No music. No fade out. Just black. And silence. Heavy, sacred, undeniable silence. I couldn't move. My shoulders were shaking, but I wasn't sure if it was grief or something softer. Something closer to release. For the first time in 10 years, I had heard my father speak to me, not with judgment, not with shame, but with truth. And in that truth, something long buried in me began to heal. The room didn't erupt, it imploded. No one said a word at first. Just stares. Blinking. Shock so sharp it almost sounded like silence. Then a throat cleared. Then a gasp. Then, the low crackle of rising tension as Mr. Dawson opened his leather folder with calm, practiced hands. The video, he said, his voice slicing clean through the room, was to provide context. Now, per Mr. Moore's revised, notarized, and legally binding last will and testament. I will read the final allocations. Lindsay made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a scoff. This has to be a joke, she hissed under her breath. Mark crossed his arms, leaning back like this was all some elaborate prank waiting to collapse. Let's hear it, then. Mr. Dawson didn't blink. To my daughter, Rachel Elaine Moore, he began, I leave the Charleston family residence, its contents, and the surrounding land, fully and without contest. The words didn't register right away. It wasn't until half the room turned their heads toward me, slow, stunned, like watching a train derail in slow motion, that I felt the weight of it land. My father had left me the house. The one I wasn't allowed to return to. The one where my name was never spoken. My hands were still in my lap, cold and still, as Dawson continued, additionally, to Rachel Moore, I leave the sum of $250,000 in liquid assets, along with the remainder of my retirement savings. Gasps now. Audible. Sharp. Lindsay's glass clinked against the floor as she sat forward, jaw slack. And to her son, Caleb Moore, Dawson added, I leave a college trust in the amount of $100,000. Caleb's eyes widened. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He turned to look at me, blinking fast, as though trying to understand if he'd heard right. I couldn't even nod. I was still trying to breathe. Dawson turned to the final page. To my son, Mark, and to my daughter, Lindsay, he read, I leave the following, a collection of family photo albums, my military compass, and the Bible given to me by my mother on my 18th birthday. The silence cracked. What? Lindsay stood so fast her chair screeched. No. No, this is a mistake. There is no mistake, Dawson replied calmly. Your father amended the will 2 years ago. It is certified, witnessed, and filed with the county. He was sick, Mark snapped. He didn't know what he was doing. He knew exactly what he was doing, Dawson said, snapping the folder shut. The echo of that sound lingered in the room longer than it should have. Then, more softly, Dawson reached into the folder one last time. There was also a handwritten note, he added. Your father requested this be read aloud. He unfolded it carefully. His voice softened. Let them remember, he read, who showed up when it mattered. Let them remember who gave without being asked. This house, this legacy, belongs to the one person who never stopped loving, quietly, without condition. I didn't cry again. Not this time. Instead, I sat still in that fragile moment, the air thick with disbelief, and listened to the final thing my father ever gave me. Recognition. Lindsay muttered something I couldn't hear. Mark looked like he might tear the couch cushion in half. I half expected someone to start yelling. But they didn't. Because deep down, even they knew, my father had spoken his truth. And it was loud enough to echo through every wall they'd tried to build to shut me out. They left in waves. Lindsay was the first to storm out, heels clacking against the hardwood like the echo of fury she couldn't put into words. Mark followed close behind, stiff, silent, dragging disbelief behind him like a shadow he couldn't shake. The room emptied slowly, awkwardly. A few cousins mumbled goodbyes to no one in particular. Others slipped away through side doors, coats clutched in embarrassment, eyes cast downward as they passed me. Not hatred this time. Something closer to shame. I didn't move. I couldn't. Not because I was in shock, but because for the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel like a ghost in this house. I felt seen. I felt chosen. Caleb was still beside me, his hand resting in mine. His grip had loosened, but he hadn't let go. Neither had I. We sat in silence as the last footsteps faded down the hallway. The only sound left was the fire, still crackling in the hearth like it hadn't noticed the drama unraveling before it. I took a breath. A real one. Then I rose slowly and walked toward the corner of the room, toward the old leather reading chair tucked beneath the bay window. It was still there, just as I remembered. Faded at the arms, creaking at the joints, molded into the shape of the man who once called it his throne. I reached out, brushing my fingers along the top of the chair. The leather was worn but warm. Familiar. "Goodbye, Dad," I whispered. "I forgive you." The words came easily. They didn't catch in my throat, didn't weigh down my chest. They simply landed. Like they'd been waiting for years to be said aloud. Behind me, Caleb didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was steady, grounding. A reminder that everything I had endured led me here, to this quiet, unexpected moment of closure. I turned back and looked around the room one last time. The walls no longer felt like they were pushing me out. The portraits, even the ones I wasn't in, didn't sting the way they used to. The house, which had once felt like a monument to rejection, had finally exhaled. It was no longer holding its breath against me. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a place where silence had finally broken. Maybe forgiveness doesn't come wrapped in words. Maybe it arrives in the stillness that follows truth. That day, I didn't walk away with bitterness or revenge. I walked away with something far rarer. Peace. Weeks passed. The house had changed, not in structure, but in spirit. It was quiet in a different way now. Not tense or cold, but soft. Settled. The kind of silence that followed storms, not from ruin, but from release. Caleb had claimed the sunroom. Every morning, I'd find him there, cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by sketchbooks and colored pencils. He drew birds mostly, cardinals, wrens, blue jays. Sometimes, he'd press a drawing into my hand at breakfast without saying a word, as if he were giving me small pieces of the piece he was finding. I spent most mornings on the porch, coffee warm between my palms, staring out at the oaks swaying in the wind like they were stretching after a long sleep. Then, one morning, a letter arrived. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in neat block letters I recognized instantly, Gerald Adams. I opened it slowly, carefully. He cried, "Rachel," the note began. "The day he realized it was you. I'd never seen your father look so small. He carried that truth with him until the end. I thought you should know." I read it twice, then folded the paper along its original creases, pressing it flat with my hand like sealing it into memory. I stepped outside onto the porch. Caleb sat on the top step, pencil in hand, tongue poking out in concentration as he shaded in a hawk's wings. His focus was complete, unshaken. He saw me in the end, I said aloud, not to Caleb, not even to myself, but to the wind, the trees, the ghosts that had waited long enough. The girl they erased hadn't disappeared. She'd just been waiting. Waiting for the truth to come home. And now that it had, she wasn't lost anymore. She was free. Some stories don't begin with love, they begin with loss. And yet, through that loss, something deeper is born, resilience, truth, and a quiet kind of courage that doesn't demand to be seen. Rachel's journey reminds us that loyalty doesn't always wear a banner or shout from rooftops. Sometimes, it looks like sending envelopes in silence, standing tall in a room full of people who would rather forget you existed, or forgiving a man who never once asked for it. What she endured wasn't just exile from her family, it was the erasure of her name, her voice, her worth. And yet, she didn't crumble. She protected her child, built a life from the ground up, and held on to dignity when the world handed her shame. That is courage, not the absence of fear, but the decision to act anyway, again and again. Her father's final confession didn't erase the pain he caused, but it proved something vital. The truth has a way of finding its way home, even if it takes a decade. It reminded us that recognition, though delayed, can still heal, and that forgiveness doesn't require permission. This story is a testament to the quiet strength of those who are overlooked, the ones who love without condition and rise without applause. It teaches us that the strongest redemption isn't loud, it's personal. Because sometimes, the people the world tries hardest to erase are the ones who were never meant to disappear.